Most people believe the biblical flood was an event of surgical and absolute annihilation, a flawless reset that swept all corrupted life from the face of the earth, leaving only 8 human survivors atop the mountains of Ararat. The truth is infinitely darker and more complex. What actually happened required an absolute biological impossibility and a devastating genetic anomaly that ancient records desperately tried to warn of throughout the centuries. This is the brutal and disturbing story of how giants not only dominated the ancient world, but managed to survive the water apocalypse, dragging antediluvian terror into the new creation. The book of Genesis, in chapter 6, verse 4, provides the initial key to this historical and theological enigma by stating with terrifying dryness that there were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward. Initial curiosity quickly turns into deep unease when the sacred texts move forward several centuries in the timeline and describe in detail King Og of Bashan, sleeping peacefully on an iron bed 9 cubits long by 4 cubits wide. The disturbing mystery of how this genetic makeup managed to bypass the most extreme population bottleneck in history reveals the darkest gears of ancient biology. The answer does not lie in empty myths, but is built gradually through the meticulous analysis of ancient Middle Eastern laws, human physiology, and Hebrew war chronicles. The antediluvian world was a scene of indescribable brutality. An ecosystem collapsed under the weight of genetic corruption and unbridled violence. The extra-biblical and apocryphal records from the Second Temple period, especially the Book of Enoch in its first section, detail with surgical precision that 200 celestial beings descended upon the summit of Mount Hermon to mingle with humanity. This profane and unnatural union birthed the fearsome Nephilim, creatures that consumed the earth's resources with relentless voracity. The society of that era operated under a state of constant suffocating terror. The human cost of this era of giants was measured in extreme scarcity and agonizing physical pain. Common peasants, men and women of regular stature, worked to absolute physical exhaustion in the muddy fields, their joints destroyed and bones ground down by the workload imposed by rulers who possessed more than double the strength and height of a normal human being. Oppression was as constant as the air. Infant mortality skyrocketed to unimaginable levels. Survival rates for women during childbirth plummeted drastically under the reproductive and physical tyranny of beings that Sumerian and Akkadian mythology would later call gods, heroes, or demigods. The annihilation began. The flood was not a peaceful rain or a prolonged meteorological phenomenon, but a catastrophe of cosmic proportions that tore the Earth's crust. The fountains of the great deep broke open simultaneously with incalculable thermodynamic pressure. The floodwaters crushed the antediluvian civilization with the kinetic force of dozens of freight trains, colliding at once against fragile stone walls. The ark, measuring exactly 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high, swayed violently in the chaotic currents like a modern oil tanker caught in the center of a Category 5 hurricane. Inside the immense gopher wood structure, rigorously sealed with heavy layers of bitumen inside and out, Noah's family faced a tearing and continuous psychological terror. Powerless, they heard the desperate screams of millions of living beings perishing outside, scratching at the wood. The titanic weight of the water-crushed skulls, pulverized bones, destroyed entire stone cities, and erased millennia of corrupted civilization. The severe trauma of hearing all of humanity being swallowed by the immense waves generated overwhelming post-traumatic stress in those 8 confined individuals. The internal darkness of the vessel was heavy and oppressive. During those long 150 days of prevailing waters, the isolation pushed the human mind and body to the absolute limit of sanity, total silence. When the waters finally receded and the ark came to rest, The silence over the devastated earth was dense and suffocating, like molten lead filling the lungs. The world was completely empty, washed from north to south, and theoretically pure. The biblical narrative establishes with crystal clarity that only Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their 3 wives, survived the global purge. 8 people carrying the crushing burden of the future of all humanity. All flesh had been destroyed. Traditional biology and genetics dictate that any physical trait or predisposition would necessarily have to be present in this tiny microgroup to continue existing and propagating. And it is precisely in this microscopic biological gap that the first and most disturbing survival mechanism of the giants begins to reveal itself to scholars. Genetic purity was tested. Scripture clearly states in Genesis chapter 6, verse 9, that Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations. This perfection, in the context of the original Hebrew language, was not merely a moral or ethical attribute, but indicated an immaculate physical and genetic integrity. His direct lineage was totally intact, free from the corruption of the Nephilim. However, the sacred text maintains a sepulchral and revealing silence regarding the detailed genetic ancestry of Noah's 3 daughters-in-law, the women who came from the corrupted world into the ark. The most compelling and widely debated biological theory suggests that Ham's wife, or possibly another of the women, carried the recessive Nephilim gene silently dormant in her DNA. The genetic dissemination worked treacherously, exactly like a dark and deep underground river, invisible on the quiet surface, but emerging with devastating force many kilometers ahead. Ham was the father of Canaan, and it was incredibly in the fertile lands of Canaan, centuries later, that the tribes of giants returned to completely dominate the geopolitical landscape. The recessive gene survived the universal flood hidden microscopically in the human genome, waiting patiently for the exact moment and environment to express itself in subsequent generations with multiplied fury. The terror returned. There is, however, a second survival mechanism strongly documented by ancient theologians and experts in early Hebrew. The expression, "and also afterward," inscribed with precision in Genesis, suggests to scholars that there was a second celestial incursion or a later hybridization event. The rebellion was not an isolated event in time. After the earth dried, the ecosystem stabilized, and humanity began to multiply again across the plains of Shinar and beyond. The same dark pattern of invasion and mixing occurred again, spreading seeds of chaos. Texts and cylinders of Mesopotamian tradition vehemently support this view of multiple interventions. Ancient Babylon maintained precise cuneiform records of the sages from before the flood, and documented in parallel that immense and terrible beings appeared after the floods to rebuild dominion through brute force. The rulers of the Canaanite city-states, aware of this cursed heritage, used the lineage of the giants to legitimize their absolute political and military power. Colossal stature ceased to be merely an exotic biological trait, to become a formidable psychological weapon of mass oppression, ensuring the unquestioning submission of smaller peoples. Thousands wept. We advance headlong to the book of Numbers, specifically chapter 13, verses 32 and 33. More than 400 bloody and exhausting years after the flood, the people of Israel march through the inhospitable desert toward the promise of a land flowing with milk and honey. The leader Moses cautiously sends 12 elite spies to map the fortifications and demographics of the territory of Canaan for 40 consecutive days. What they find in the mountains completely destroys the morale, faith, and sanity of the entire nation. They report, in tears, having seen the fearsome sons of Anak, direct descendants of the ancient giants. The terrified account states literally that the Israelites felt like tiny grasshoppers before them, both in stature and in martial capacity. The psychological impact on the 12 spies was frighteningly similar to that of light infantry soldiers, equipped only with knives, facing modern armored tanks without possessing any anti-tank weaponry. The physiology of animal fear took hold of the nervous system of more than 2 million people camped in the desert. The accumulated exhaustion of the journey through a scorching and dehydrating desert was added instantly to the absolute panic. The incalculable human cost of this nefarious discovery was the nervous and spiritual collapse of an entire nation in a single night. Adult men, warriors forged in Egyptian slavery, screamed and tore their clothes, weeping uncontrollably all night long, consumed by the mathematical certainty that they would be crushed, devoured, and annihilated by colossal warriors who weighed more than 250 kilograms and boasted musculature absurdly hypertrophied by relentless generations of genetic selection and constant warfare. Lost generations. The long text of the Book of Deuteronomy, precisely in its chapter 3, details with cartographic richness the violent military conquest against these gigantic entities. The powerful King Og of Bashan is described historically as the last remnant of the ancient Rephaim in that region east of the Jordan River. His monumental iron bed, kept as a macabre trophy in the city of Rabbah of the Ammonites, measured a frightening 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. Using the official cubit measurement of Hebrew antiquity, we are speaking directly of a metallic bed approximately 4.5 meters long by almost 2 meters wide. King Og's bed possessed the square footage of a small contemporary apartment, designed to support an immense biological mass. Og's colossal height made him look like an immense grizzly bear standing fiercely on its hind legs, casting a terrifying and icy shadow over any trembling diplomat or enemy warrior who dared to enter the throne room. The deliberate and expensive choice of solid iron for the bed frame was not a mere aesthetic detail or an accidental royal luxury. The monumental living weight of the giant would easily shatter any common hardwood bed of the time in a few nights of use. Og's absurdly dense bone structure required a consumption of more than 6,000 daily calories just to maintain the vital functions of his massive organs, perfectly reflecting the unsustainable weight that these parasitic elites imposed on the scarce agricultural resources of the subjugated Canaanite populations. Bronze and blood. The persistence of this anomalous genetics refuses to die easily and culminates spectacularly in the first book of Samuel, chapter 17, starting from verse 4. The Philistine army, in a position of advantage on the hills, proudly presents its ultimate champion. Goliath of the city of Gath advances confidently to the center of the valley of Elah, making the ground shake with every step. His exact and documented height is recorded as 6 cubits and a span, which places him frighteningly close to, or even beyond, 3 meters in modern metrics. The intricate suit of bronze scale armor that enveloped his immense torso weighed an absurd 5,000 shekels. The giant's defensive armor weighed exactly the equivalent of an average-sized adult man of that time, dumping about 60 kilograms of solid metal relentlessly onto his broad shoulders for hours under the scorching Middle Eastern sun. The shaft of his spear was formidable, but the pointed iron head of his spear weighed a massive 600 shekels, resulting in approximately 7.5 kilograms of lethal metal just in the front blade. Goliath's spear was not an agile dart. It was as thick and heavy as the solid wood central axle of a large industrial weaver's loom of antiquity. The mechanical physics required to swing and throw such a colossal weapon with lethal precision and piercing speed required a brutal muscular lever, tendons thick as naval ropes, and a bone density infinitely superior to that of a standard human. A glancing blow from that weapon would not cut an enemy. It would literally split him in half by the mere brute force of the kinetic impact. The ground cracked. Modern secular archaeology and ancient Egyptian administrative records independently corroborate the intimidating presence of tribes of exceptional stature and extreme bellicosity in the Levant region. Ancient Egyptian execration texts, ritual ceramic vessels dated to approximately 2,000 years before Christ, explicitly mention by name the Anakim, the exact same frightening tribes described in the biblical narrative, referring to them with deep fear as leaders of formidable clans and indomitable warriors who constantly threatened the pharaoh's vital trade routes. The mere historical presence of these gigantic beings forced the Canaanite city-states to abandon common architecture and hurriedly build fortifications of cyclopean proportions. The immense stone walls of Jericho and the main Canaanite capitals rose menacingly like cliffs of solid granite before the exhausted Israelite nomads. All of this was meticulously designed, not only to keep large invading enemy armies outside the gates, but above all, to accommodate the disproportionate size and protect the gigantic ruling elite from the resentment of the common masses. The enormous investment of human resources, military engineering, and time in these impassable fortifications suggests an undeniably chronic and constant state of defensive war, in addition to evidencing a predatory economy entirely geared toward feeding, arming, and eternally sustaining a biologically hypertrophied warrior class. The massacre continued. The long confrontation of the Israelites with the remnants of the giants was not just an isolated military challenge in famous battles, but consisted of a long, methodical, and bloody intergenerational campaign of biological eradication. General Joshua waged brutal and relentless battles to purge and hunt this persistent genetics from the mountain ranges of Hebron, Debir, and Anab, as rigorously recorded in the book of Joshua, chapter 11, verses 21 and 22. The historical text states categorically that none of the dangerous Anakim were left alive in the land of the mountains of the children of Israel, with the last fugitives surviving only in the walled cities of Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. These three important Philistine coastal cities became the last great refuge and the pocket of preservation for Nephilim genetics. The relentless demographic strangulation executed by the Hebrew army forced the giants to retreat and concentrate in small strongholds, which explains exactly and with geographical perfection why Goliath and his terrible gigantic brothers appeared coming directly from Gath several centuries later. The astonishing geographical, logistical, and genealogical precision of the sacred texts mirrors real military tactics of population isolation and prolonged genetic siege. The anomaly resisted. The divine plan of absolute post-flood purity faced the fierce and relentless resistance of biology and genetic stubbornness. Total physical elimination required the bloody effort of entire generations of leaders and warriors willing to die. From the marches of Moses and Joshua in the arid desert to the consolidated reign of David and the suicide missions of his most valiant men. The young David did not descend to the dry bed of the valley and collect 5 smooth stones from the brook due to a supposed lack of trust in God's own power or fear of the impending confrontation, but because military intelligence dictated that Goliath had exactly 4 giant relatives and brothers living actively in Gath, a fact corroborated and narrated with rich detail in the second book of Samuel, chapter 21, verses 15 through 22. During one of these exhausting combats, the formidable giant Ishbi-Benob, whose bronze spearhead alone weighed 300 shekels, surprised and nearly brutally murdered the already aging King David on the battlefield. The frantic hand-to-hand combat against these immense biological anomalies wore down the muscles of common human soldiers to the point of total rupture. Violently shattered short iron swords, crushed bones under dented shields, and exacted a very high price in bloodshed that the Israelites paid painfully over the course of almost 500 years of continuous and exhausting territorial conflicts. The inevitable end. The disturbing survival of the giants to the most severe and lethal mass extinction event in human history undeniably attests to the terrifying resilience of biological error and primordial genetic corruption. Whether acting silently through the invisible genetic smuggling running in the veins of Noah's daughter-in-law inside the safety of the ark, or operating ostensibly through a perverse new insurgency of fallen entities in the tumultuous post-flood world, the monstrous anomaly refused point-blank to disappear peacefully into the mists of time. They returned relentless, rebuilt kingdoms based on absolute tyranny, forged the most monumental and heavy weapons of the Bronze Age, and violently terrorized the vital trade routes and peaceful peoples of the ancient world for dozens of uninterrupted centuries. The systematically crushed bones of the countless anonymous antediluvian victims gave way to the dread of the gigantic Philistine spears shining in the sun, and to the silent horror emanating from the immense iron beds of Bashan in the east. The overwhelming presence of the giants brutally forced the accelerated military tactical development of smaller nations, demanded desperate human courage, and served as the great catalyst for the unification of the 12 divided tribes under the iron banner of the Hebrew monarchy, all with the sole purpose of confronting and annihilating a superior biological threat that seemed completely invincible and immortal to the eyes and panic of common men. The heavy cuneiform stone records unearthed in the sands of the Middle East, the heavy spearheads oxidized by time, buried under the smoking ruins of ancient desert cities, and the long and precise genealogies of the ancient Hebrew scriptures record perfectly, without a shadow of a doubt, both the terrifying presence and the inevitable and violent fall of this ancient genetic anomaly on Earth. What threatened to consume and devour all primitive humanity by the simple application of brute force and unrestricted genetic domination was slowly, painfully, and systematically reduced in numbers, cornered geographically, isolated politically, and finally extinguished from the surface of the terrestrial globe by the unshakable persistence and faith of common mortal men armed with humble shepherd's slings, smooth brookstones, and incipient short iron swords. Deep and corrupted evil, even when it possesses nearly 3 meters of impressive height, wears an immense bronze cuirass and miraculously survives the end of the world through dark waters, still possesses invariably a fatal blind spot in the exact center of its brilliant and proud armor. The immense and ancient giants stumbled and fell heavily into the dry dust of history from which they came, and the bruised and exhausted earth finally found its long rest from their terrible shadow and relentless weight.